Welcome to Mob Truth, where the real stories of America's underworld come alive. If you enjoy these true tales, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Vincent Coll was the son of Irish immigrants, one of 7 children squeezed into a cramped Bronx tenement. His father worked the railroad as a guard, long hours for little pay, barely enough to feed so many mouths. The Coll family lived with constant struggle, poverty, overcrowding, and the rough edges of immigrant life in New York. In that chaos, Vincent learned early that survival meant being tougher, faster, and meaner than the next kid. The kids wore hand-me-down clothes and often went to sleep hungry. For Vincent, the streets outside became his classroom. The Bronx was noisy and unforgiving, where survival meant being tougher and meaner than the next kid. By the time Vincent was a teenager, the streets had already claimed him. School was long behind. The classrooms couldn't hold him. The teachers couldn't control him. He was more comfortable here, in the alleys, standing shoulder to shoulder with men twice his age. They were gangsters, and Vincent was eager to prove himself. He had a reputation already, quick with his fists, quicker with a knife. If he wanted something, he took it. Petty theft, stick-ups, shaking down local shops, nothing was off limits. It wasn't about the money yet. For Vincent, it was about the thrill, about showing no fear. And that fearlessness made him dangerous. The older gangsters saw it. They saw a boy who didn't hesitate, who would jump headfirst into a fight most men would walk away from. Vincent became their errand boy, their lookout, their muscle. Not because they trusted him, but because they knew he was reckless enough to do the jobs others wouldn't. In these alleys, his real education began. Not reading or writing, but lessons in crime, loyalty, and violence. Lessons that would carry him deeper into the underworld. This was the birth of Mad Dog Coll, and it started right here in the shadows. The Lower East Side was a crucible of ambition and desperation. Tenement walls sweated with the lives of immigrants, each one clawing for a piece of the American promise. For most, it meant factory floors, sweatshops, or selling fruit from a cart. But for Vincent Coll, the streets offered something else: power and the chance to take it fast. Even as a boy, Vincent couldn't sit still. Teachers complained he was disruptive, quick to fight, quick to steal. While other kids memorized lessons, he was memorizing the way gang lookouts whistled when cops came near. By the time he hit his teenage years, Coll wasn't just another street kid. He was already learning the business of survival. He gravitated to the older boys who lingered in alleys like this one, men whose sharp suits and easy money seemed like a ticket out of poverty. Vincent didn't just watch, he ran errands, carried messages, and fought anyone who doubted him. And fight he did. He earned a reputation as reckless, fearless, and impossible to control. Fists, knives, pipes, it didn't matter. If Vincent was in a brawl, he'd fight until someone was bleeding on the pavement. Those traits, bravery mixed with madness, caught the attention of gangsters. Soon, Coll wasn't standing on the curb anymore. He was part of the circle. In backroom poker games and dimly lit bars, his name began to circulate. He was young, but his temper and raw courage made older men nervous. They whispered that the Coll kid would either end up dead before 20 or feared before 30. Vincent liked that talk. He fed on it. Every time he walked through the streets, chin high, hat pulled low, people moved aside. He wasn't yet a made man, but he was carving his way in. And in a city where violence was the quickest way to respect, Vincent was more than willing to oblige. This was the beginning of the legend, the spark that would one day explode into the fury that earned him the name Mad Dog. By the early 1930s, Vincent wasn't satisfied running errands or taking orders. He wanted his own piece of the city. With his brother Peter by his side, Coll began recruiting men. Not just street kids, but soldiers from Dutch Schultz's own ranks. It was a dangerous move. Schultz was a powerful mob boss, and nobody robbed him of territory or men without paying a price. But Vincent didn't care. Peter Coll stood loyally at his brother's side, but loyalty in the underworld came at a cost. As Vincent's ambitions grew, so did the bloodshed. Dutch Schultz, once an ally, now saw the Coll brothers as a threat that had to be eliminated. Dutch Schultz, born Arthur Flegenheimer, he hated that name. Too soft, too foreign, too Jewish for a man who wanted to be feared. So he took the name Dutch Schultz, and with it he built a reputation as one of the Bronx's most ruthless bootleggers. Schultz was more than just another gangster. He was a storm in a city already drowning in crime. Quick-tempered, paranoid, and violent, men either worked for him or ended up buried by him. Schultz at the table with his crew, pan across the faces, hold on Schultz at center. At this table, Schultz sat with the men who carried out his empire, killers, enforcers, and lieutenants who controlled the beer racks and speakeasies across New York. But Schultz had a problem: Vincent and Peter Coll. At first, he'd welcome Vincent into his world, seeing him as muscle, a wild dog he could unleash on rivals. But the Coll brothers were different. They weren't content to stay soldiers. Peter whispered about independence, about building their own gang, even recruiting Schultz's men to join them. To Schultz, that was betrayal, and betrayal had only one punishment in his world. So as the whiskey flowed and the smoke filled the room, Dutch Schultz made a decision. The Coll brothers had to be eliminated. The Bronx wasn't big enough for both him and Mad Dog Vincent. By the early 1930s, the streets of New York were drowning in bullets. Vincent Coll's rebellion against his former boss, Dutch Schultz, had spiraled into a public war. Drive-by shootings, kidnappings, even bombings. The newspapers began using the phrase escalating violence almost daily. Ordinary New Yorkers were terrified. For them, it wasn't about which gangster came out on top. It was about whether their children could walk to school without crossing a battlefield. Coll's crew answered Schultz with reckless fury. Cars full of men armed with Thompson submachine guns tore through the Bronx and Harlem, spitting lead at anyone thought to be loyal to Dutch. Coll's reputation for fearlessness only grew. He rode along on many of these missions himself, eager to prove that no one could scare him off the streets. But his crew wasn't disciplined soldiers. They were young, angry, and desperate for respect. Every burst of gunfire put innocent lives in danger. The breaking point came in July 1931. Coll's men spotted rival gangsters outside a Bronx drugstore and opened fire from their car. The bullets ripped through the crowd, but the targets escaped. Instead, a hail of gunfire struck bystanders. Most horrifying of all, a 5-year-old child was killed in the spray. The city exploded in outrage. Politicians, police, and the press no longer saw Vincent as just another mobster. He was branded a public menace, a symbol of everything rotten in Prohibition's gang wars. Dutch Schultz knew the moment had come to crush the Coll brothers for good. He ordered his men to make an example, and Vincent's brother Peter paid the price. Gunmen cornered him in a Bronx alley and pumped him full of bullets, leaving his body sprawled in the gutter. To Dutch, it was a message. There was no room for rivals. To Vincent, it was personal. With his brother dead and the city calling for his head, the man who once dreamed of leading his own crew was being hunted from every direction. Newspaper headline: Mad Dog Coll, baby killer, strikes fear in New York. The outrage reached its peak after the Bronx shooting. Headlines screamed baby killer across New York papers. The people were furious, demanding justice. Vincent Coll was no longer seen as just another mobster. He was public enemy number one. Mayor Jimmy Walker, a man never shy about using colorful language, stood before microphones and branded him with a name that would stick for life: Mad Dog Coll. To Walker, Vincent was not a gangster, not even human. He was a rabid animal loose in the streets. The press ran with it. Every paper, every radio broadcast, every whisper in the speakeasies carried the same message: Vincent Coll was a monster. While the city raged against him, Vincent didn't stop. He still roamed the streets with his crew, collecting payoffs, kidnapping rivals, and making calls from dark corners to set up his next move. But the walls were closing in. His enemies weren't just Schultz's men anymore. Now it was the police, the politicians, and the press, all united by one goal: put down the Mad Dog. His power shrank, his allies disappeared, and his reckless violence had made him untouchable even to those who once feared him. By 1932, Vincent Coll knew the city wanted him dead. He dyed his hair black, grew a mustache, and tried to move in the shadows, but his enemies were everywhere. Dutch Schultz had already put the word out. Mad Dog had to be put down. The man who carried out the order was hired gunman working under the protection of Lucky Luciano's circle, with Schultz's blessing. On a cold February night, Coll stepped into a phone booth on 8th Avenue, thinking he was safe enough to make a call. But someone had spotted him. A lookout recognized the baby killer despite the new disguise and made the call that sealed his fate. Within minutes, a car rolled up. The shooters, professional button men tied to Schultz, opened fire with Thompson's submachine guns. Bullets shredded the glass and tore through Coll. The crowd rushed in, gathering around his fallen body. Some whispered in shock. Others smirked at the end of a man who had become a curse to New York. No one shed a tear. Mayor Jimmy Walker's words, calling him Mad Dog, now hung in the air like prophecy. To the city, this wasn't just another gangster hit. This was justice, the end of a reckless killer who had brought chaos, grief in the death of innocence. Lying on the cobblestones, Vincent Coll wasn't a feared mobster anymore. He was just another body in a city that had finally had enough. As Vincent Coll's reputation spiraled out of control, the law needed a face, someone who could stand against the chaos. That man was Thomas E. Dewey, a young, ambitious prosecutor who had already begun carving out a name for himself in New York by taking on organized crime. Dewey was sharp, relentless, and he understood something many didn't. If men like Coll weren't stopped, the entire city would fall deeper into lawlessness. For Dewey, Coll was the perfect target. Here was a gangster who wasn't just shaking down rackets or killing rivals. He had crossed a line no one could forgive. After the drive-by that left a 5-year-old boy dead, public outrage boiled over. The press screamed for justice, and the mayor, Jimmy Walker, branded him Mad Dog. Dewey seized the moment. He began building a case against Coll, digging into his extortion rackets, his alliances, his bloody trail of violence. Witnesses were terrified, but the city's rage was stronger than its fear. Every courtroom appearance, every press statement, Dewey made it clear. Coll wasn't just another gangster. He was an animal, a man who had to be caged or put down. The war between Coll and the law became personal. Detectives were assigned to shadow him, informants whispered his movements, and Dewey himself promised the public that Mad Dog Coll will be brought to justice. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a showdown between a prosecutor desperate to prove himself and a gangster who thought he was untouchable. The headline said it all. Mad Dog Coll, baby killer strikes fear in New York. Vincent Coll had dyed his hair black, grown a mustache, tried every trick to stay hidden. But there was no running from the truth. The reckless machine gun attack that left a 5-year-old child dead made him the city's most hated man. Overnight, the press turned him into a public enemy. Mayor Jimmy Walker himself gave him the nickname Mad Dog, a name that clung tighter than any alias Vincent ever tried to invent. From that moment, Coll wasn't feared like Capone or respected like Lucky Luciano. He was despised. The papers painted him as a man without loyalty, without control, without honor. Every headline made him more of an outcast, and every enemy, from Dutch Schultz to the police to Thomas Dewey's investigators, wanted him erased. This was the story of Vincent Mad Dog Coll. Born the son of Irish immigrants in the Bronx, he rose fast and burned out even faster. He built a reputation on fear, kidnapping rivals, turning the streets into battlegrounds, and earning the wrath of gangsters, politicians, and the press. Branded Mad Dog after the killing of a child, Coll's name became a curse in New York. No disguise, no dyed hair, no mustache could save him from his fate. Betrayed, cornered, and gunned down in a phone booth. His story ended the only way reckless gangsters do, in a hail of bullets. This was not the tale of a legend to be admired, but of a gangster whose violence made him hated even in the underworld. His name will always be remembered for chaos, for fear, and for the innocent lives caught in his war. Don't forget to subscribe, and welcome to all the new soldiers of the Mob Truth family.